My name is Hangcheng. Thanks the organizer for including our paper. So this is a joint paper with my advisor Ron, who is sitting over there. So today we are going to look at the sim setting. But now today we are going to look at the impacts of different algorithms, how the algorithms impact the setting. So for the setting, it is similar as the setting Chuan talked about yesterday, and also a lot of this work is based on, for example, Chuan's work, Tai's work, and also In-K's works that we saw last year in this workshop. But the difference here is that today I'm more focusing on the impact of different algorithms. So as we know, when we go on the website, we see a combination of both sponsored and organic. For the sponsors, the sellers paid for it to win extra consumer awareness. But now in the market, we know that there are lots of third-party Amazon software providers telling the seller that they are using different machine learning or AI algorithms to help soften their price wall to increase the sales profit. So these softwares are designed to maximize the sales profit because the random export, because the speed of the updating and the speed of figuring out the market change, it is easier for the algorithms to reach the outcome to give a higher profit for the sellers. But here, because they were trying to maximize the profit, it increased the price, but higher prices hurts consumers and raises antitrust concerns. And that is what the literature talk about, and that is where I come from. So for the research question today, so similar setting, but now we are going to ask a different question: how do reinforcement learning algorithms impact the competition price, the bid, the seller's profit, the platform profit, and ultimately the consumer surplus? For the second question, I'm trying to provide some empirical evidence supporting that actually algorithms are not necessarily always bad. Sometimes it can give beneficial outcome for the consumers, depends on the interaction of this pricing bidding algorithms. So for the agenda of today's talk, basically is three different parts. For the first part, I'm going to talk about the intuition, how algorithms collude, and why collusion might not always be bad in my scenario. So for the second part, I'm going to use a combination of both theory prediction and simulation, reinforcement and simulation to simulate the algorithm outcome and trying to show that actually the competitive price can be higher than the algorithm price. For the third part, it is mostly an empirical evidence, empirical application, trying to show this negative interaction might be possible, might be realistic in a real world setting. Finally, I'm going to conclude today's talk and talk about the managerial implications. So for the background for the literature, so recent research has shown that when the sellers use algorithms to decide their pricing, actually, if they both use algorithms, because these algorithms randomly explore, they might result in higher prices, but higher prices hurt consumers. So this is the graph from the Damano paper, which tells us how these algorithms learn to collude. The x-axis is the time, and the y-axis is the price in the market. So the author starts both of them from the very low competitive price, because the reinforcement learning algorithms have the random exploration feature. So the algorithms are going to randomly explore some of the other prices within the strategy space. Gradually, this two firms will realize that coordinate on higher prices will give both of the firms higher profit, and that benefits the sellers and hurts consumers. So because they randomly explore, even if later in the stage, for example, one of the firms deviate from the high prices because they explore again, they will still coordinate on higher prices, but that hurts consumers and raises antitrust concern. So the in the setting, what I found is that when the sellers use these algorithms to price and bid, actually they still learn to close, which means that they're still trying to maximize the profit and gives them a higher profit. However, when this sellers use both of the pricing and bidding decisions and they use algorithms, actually the algorithm price might not always be higher, it can be lower than the competitive price and benefit consumers. And finally, in order to show this interaction, I'm going to present a negative interaction effect that I found using a real world data. So now I'm going to talk about why the algorithm price can be lower. So Chan already talked about yesterday about the interaction between pricing and bidding. Now I'm going to focus more on how algorithms interact this interaction. So when this algorithm is trying to close, the object is trying to maximize the profit. But for the profit part, there are two parts. On one hand, they were trying to maximize the revenue. On the other hand, they were also trying to minimize the cost. When they try to maximize the revenue, this is what the previous literature tells us. So they were trying to price a little bit higher compared with the competitive level, because in the competitive level, they compete too strongly, they price too low. So this algorithm is trying to price a little bit higher to soften price competition. But because the algorithms price higher compared with the world without algorithms, this is a higher valuation compared with the world without algorithms. So they have a higher option value so that it can lead the algorithms to bid higher. On the other hand, there's also a cost side here, which is the automatic bidding. For example, when these algorithms trying to bid, they have the tendency to minimize the cost. How they would like to minimize the cost is by bidding lower. But bidding lower at the same time is a lower marginal cost. So because the marginal cost is low, actually, for the algorithms, they don't need to price that high for their products. Actually, the ultimate price for the product itself can be lower. So as we can see, here is an interaction. On one hand, algorithms can lead to price higher. On the other hand, algorithms can also lead to price lower. This is an interaction effect. Actually, how much products consumer consider, how important the ads are, is the moderate here. So the negative interaction, actually, I'm going to show in the real world using the Amazon data. Actually, I found this negative interaction effect pricing. So for the model setup, as we saw yesterday, similar setup. So their platform display the products into two types of position, sponsored and organic position, and the seller is trying to decide the price for their bid, price for their products and how much they would like to bid for those listings. The sellers can either choose to bid on themselves or to use algorithms to help them make their repeat decisions. And finally, consumers are heterogeneous. Some consider more, some consider less, but the advertising just brings them more awareness in this setting. So for the presentation today, I'm going to first present a very specific model of two different sellers with homogeneous products. There's one sponsored listing, two organic listing. Consumers can only consider their first products or consider everything. And I'm going to first present the interaction effect. Later, I'm going to talk about why this can generalize to heterogeneous effect, why I can still use the prediction from a two-seller model to test the interaction effect. So for a brief introduction about the algorithm usage. So the reinforcement learning algorithm is an exploitation type of algorithm. What the algorithm trying to do is ultimately trying to maximize the profit. So the algorithms are going to randomly explore some of the pricing and bidding strategy, find the combination that will maximize the profit. Later in the stage, they will enter the exploitation stage more, which means that they are going to choose the strategy that has been proven more successfully with a higher probability. That is the intuition of this reinforcement learning algorithms. Yes.
Conceptually, trying to understand why this is necessary to reinforcement learning problem, because the first plot we showed prices approach a steady state. So let's just extrapolate away from the learning and assume that for reinforcement learning, I know the states and the payoffs. So I could look at the price of brand one, I could look at the price of brand two, I could look at the payoffs across the space. Now it's just a matter of not learning what the game play conditioned on. And what we seem to be presupposing is that these algorithms learn not to play Nash or even iterative best response. In equilibrium, they're colluding, which is hard to understand because they could, in theory, if the agent serves one vendor, they could deviate and make a lot more money. If they know the entire space. So my questions are twofold. First, why is this a reinforcement learning problem? Because an agent can make a decision conditioned on full information about states. And second, given the full information about states, why is it that algorithms are using not iterative best response, not Nash?
So for the first part, it is not necessarily reinforcement. So as long as they have the exploration feature, it can be other types of algorithms, but the key feature is that right now they explore. People can also explore different one. But for your second question, why the algorithms are necessarily needed? Why, for example, human can also deviate. The difference here is because of the speed they realize you're deviating from and the speed they are trying to explore them. For example, human can also play the same game for green trigger. We enter the punishment stage, but we are not back to the previous stage. But here, what the algorithm does is, if they deviate from it, because of their mapping, because their Q-learning ability will realize that if I deviate in one shot in this stage, I'm battering off, but in the long run, I'm worse off. So
if I understand your argument correctly, saying the reinforcement learning algorithm is not learning the entire state-space space. That, for example, let's just take a 2x2 prisoner's dilemma. They only learn the cooperate cell. They don't learn the defect cells, these algorithms. In which case, why is this even an efficient reinforcement learning algorithm? Because reinforcement learning algorithm can be tuned to learn the different payoffs, right? And accept those payoffs to get better profits, because a strong reinforcement learning algorithm will discover there's a better strategy.
So they are learning all possible state space outcomes, but they are still selecting the coordinate. So the outcome is in the long run. So in this stage, for the single shots, they are better off. But because they are trying to maximize the long run, they will realize the coordinate on the later stage.
I just don't see why that's a statement.
I want to add, like long-term and short-term, they're both Nash.
Yeah.
Right. You're asking about short-term Nash.
Yeah.
The reinforcement learning does collude on the long-term. They are going Nash.
So you think it's a dynamic game in the optimal strategy?
The payoff space includes already the dynamic continuation function. And what Hangcheng was mentioning, this exploration thing is what allows them to keep this. She's more of an expert than I am. There's a weird thing that you're using a short-term payoff matrix to make long-term decisions. Some way converges to include the long-term punishments, negations, etc. in the short term. If you look at the short-term matrix in the long term, it doesn't reflect the one period thing. It does reflect the long.
Yeah, follow-up question. So I guess you're comparing the case where everyone is using algorithm or everyone is not using algorithm. What happens if a subset are using algorithm? Are they paying a short term or a long term? What happens?
So let me go to the main results. I'm going to show that actually the crossing points, the interaction does not, this depends on the regional or the solid scoring because the unique outcomes is pinned down by the incentive canvas script. That is unique. But a higher ratio of the algorithm usage indeed leads to higher levels. So let me present the results so that it might be easier for us to understand. So the x-axis is the ratio of the consumers who are only considering the top. Here you can interpret as, for example, how important the ads are. The ads are just bring the product's actual awareness. So the y-axis is the price in the market on the different scenarios. So the black line is the sellers are using themselves to play this game, while the blue line is when they use algorithms to play this game. The previous result is the red dot, which tells us if consumers consider everything, if there is no search friction in this market, actually the algorithms can increase the price in the market, and that hurts consumers. However, if the importance of the ads becoming stronger, if more and more consumers just considering their first products, actually, if we compare the blue line with the black line can be higher than the blue line, which means that if the ads are very important, the algorithm price can actually be lower than the competitive price, and that benefits consumers. And in order to show that actually the algorithms facilitate collusion, and I will next consider another scenario, which is the full-inclusive scenario, and it can help me understand why this result does not depend on, for example, specific parameters I'm putting in the algorithms, as long as the algorithms always have some random exploration feature, they will facilitate some beneficial outcome.
Yeah, I got a question about, I mean, I know that AR paper basically show the algorithm in some sense they are kind of forward-looking to a certain degree so that they can have the solution. And my question is, what do we mean for algorithm to be forward-looking, and what do we mean for algorithm to have discount factors so that they can sustain those kind of dynamic game? That's like, how do we interpret this? What do we mean by discount factor?
Basically, what they are trying to maximize is the long run reward. And each time you're trying to maximize a long run reward, and you are putting some weight on your new knowledge, old knowledge, your new knowledge, which means the profit you're getting from this single period, and there's some old knowledge part. Because you are learning this long run equilibrium using a lot of data points, in the long run, you are just updating your knowledge across different periods, and that is a long run update.
Yeah, I might have missed that. So when you say on both pricing and option bid algorithms, so is it one algorithm that solves both problems, or is it two different problems?
It can be one or two. So this result coming from the algorithm making both pricing and bidding decisions, but the result also holds that, for example, there's one pricing algorithms, there's one bidding algorithms, but the key here is that for the objective function they need to maximize, it's a combination of both pricing and advertising part. If the objective is from this both part, and they are at least updating the price and bid at some point, they are operating as if it is a single algorithms doing the two different decisions.
I see. And in practice, what do startups usually use? Is it different firms that solve different problems?
In practice, actually, we see that they use one algorithms for pricing and they use another one for bidding. But there is some evidence, for example, from the real estate market, the real page, they actually consider, for example, the cost factor when they are making this price decisions. And there is an updating from this.
Because advertising would.
Yes.
Are you thinking about a world in which data is fixed, or data depends on the equilibrium that the information like incentive to search is fixed, or the incentive to search depends on how much price competition there is?
The incentive to search actually depends on how much there is a price competition.
Yeah.
So actually, if at this crossing point, because the price on the different scenario is the same, so that point is uniquely down. But it can be, for example, optimal search. But right now, I'm just showing there is some hidden genetic here throughout the results.
In your case, it's the pricing for the product and the visa is a joint decision. Is that correct?
Here it is a joint decision, but in the appendix, I also separated it. So one, the state space and strategy space is the price, another is bid. But the objective function is from the two parts and the same result.
But in reality, on Amazon, are sellers so strategic that the decision is really joint, the pricing of product and the advertising is so correlated? Is that real?
So I discussed this question with some of my friends, and they actually say that well, the sellers, they actually say that when they make their pricing decisions, they consider how much money they are making from the advertising. But you are right, if I just fix my advertising strategy and if I never update my bids, it is the same result as the previous research. So algorithms reach conclusion and that was considered.
Yes, this is a nice theoretical possibility, but the threshold seems very high. Right, like it's 70% of the products that are competing with each other need to be considered by consumers. Is that a realistic threshold for most Amazon searches?
So this is a stylized model just to show actually the exact same value does not matter. And what I'm testing is this active interaction. And according to for example, trans estimation, ties estimation, and the paper in the literature, so roughly media consumer considered 15, so it is also a very high.
Oh, I thought this was a share of total products.
Share, there are
Like 15 products is not 70% of the products. that
there are
appear in search
two
results.
products here, one sponsored, two organic.
Is it the share of consumers or only considered?
I see.
This is not share of
Okay.
products. Okay.
So for the algorithms, as we can see, when we consider a full closed case, which means that the two different sellers sit in a hotel room and coordinate on both price and bid. And in that case, they will coordinate on zero bid because this is a zero cost for them. And then they will decide on their price. And if that is the scenario, that is the red one, it means that if the search cost increase, actually, it is a higher monopoly power. So for the monopoly, they actually have the incentive to lower the price a little bit to increase the demand so that the total profit is increased. So that is the intuition for the red one. So finally, for the algorithms, because they are trying to optimize their profit, they always facilitate some kind of inclusive outcome, but the inclusive outcome is beneficial for consumers in this range. Finally, notice that in the two endpoint, there is an interaction effect, which means that when most of the consumers consider everything when search friction is very low, the algorithms increase the price. While if the ads are very important, the algorithms lower the price. This is an interaction effect, and actually, we can empirically test this.
I have a question. Feel free to defer this, sure. How do these reinforcement learning algorithms take into account things like entry? So if I'm thinking about like real pages, maybe someone's not gonna like build a new apartment building because people are, is there some conclusion, but it's Amazon? Like it's possible at some point you trigger entry of some editor, and it seems like we kind of do that reinforcement learning like through experimentation, exploitation, like whatever we could.
Yes, so in the long run, if there are more different sellers, it can still be beneficial for consumers in the endpoint, because in this endpoint, even if there are more sellers, they still fix at the same point because all the bids are the same. But the ads increase the price, which is the black line. So in the endpoint, the inclusive price still be lower than the candidate price, but you are indeed right in the setting of entry and exit, it will change the price. It's the same. It will change how they converge to the price.
Have you thought about how the platform might respond to this type of collusion? And I mean, I would imagine in this simple case, you would want noise in the ranking.
Yes, if you want noise, in the setting, the black line will shift down because for the sellers, it is a greater uncertainty, the importance of ads are reduced, so it will decrease the price. If the ranking is completely random, it doesn't depend on your base, the results will not hold because the black line and red line will coincide in the same point. But as long as the ranking algorithm still is a function of the bits. As long as it is monotonic increasing in the bits, the result will hold. And later I'll talk about, for example, the platform strategic response of adjusting reserve price, adjusting. As I mentioned before, the algorithm randomly explore and facilitate some kind of crucial outcome and as an endpoint. Negative interaction effect. I'm going to use the data to empirically test this interaction effect. So for the data following what Chuan did, what Tai did, same type of data from a different period. So it is a keyword scraping result. Recording information on the first page, basically the position of different products and the price of different products, and using the variation in the sales and position to identify how important the ads are. And then these are some screenshots of the information page. So for the interaction effect, the consumer set estimation, the search cost estimation is following the literature. But what I did something new is I want to test the interaction effect. So in order to do that, the key difficulty here is that the algorithm usage is actually unknown from the data. I don't know whether a seller is using algorithm or not. In order to do that, I am following some idea from the CS literature. Basically, after I get the estimation of how many products consumer consider, I will generate an algorithm usage index by looking at the price correlation in the market. The key idea is here. So if the market average price is changing frequently, and if the sellers are using algorithms to help them make the price decisions, it might correlate it with the price of other products more. It might correlate it with the market average more because at each point they have a higher correlation. So basically, I have the product vector of each product, and I also have the market average price. This is the vector at each time point. If this correlation is high enough above a certain threshold, and then I'm going to infer that a certain seller J is using algorithms. And then I'm taking the average among all different sellers in this product K, and then use that as the market average algorithm usage index. And then to empirically test the interaction results. So in this figure, I'm separating the market with consumer consider more of the products versus fewer of the products. And then I'm separating the market with high versus low algorithm usage. And as we can see, there's an indeed negative interaction result in the market where consumer consider fewer products in the market where the ads are more important. Actually, higher algorithm usage lower the price in the market, and the mechanism is through bidding lower. So for the platform strategy response, as Ken just asked, so basically there are two instruments the platform can use. On one hand, they can adjust the commission fee. On the other hand, they can also adjust the reserve price in the market. And the platform is getting a sum of these two different parts. In order to adjust the commission fee, they can adjust the commission rate. On the other hand, they can also adjust the auction reserve price. And right now, not fixing. So for the auction reserve price, I'm letting the platform gradually increase the reserve price and letting the sellers relearn the long run equilibrium. And the result turns out to be that the actually increasing the auction reserve price is not very active for the sellers, because for the algorithms, they will really, really quickly realize that coordinate on even lower price will give the sellers a higher prices. So increasing the auction reserve price is not very effective, and that is pretty counterintuitive, because previously we showed that the algorithms tend to bid lower, but here actually if you force them to definitely reach a reserve price, they can coordinate on even lower bids, and that hurts the platforms. However, with adjusting the commission rate is effective for the platforms, because they are just putting different weight on the two different instruments. But here, if you increasing the commission rate, that will hurt consumers, because ultimately it will pass on the consumers. So to summarize, so what I found here is that the algorithms can benefit consumers when the ads are very important. And the result, actually, the algorithm price can be beneficial for consumers, can generalize to different types of algorithms, as long as they have a randomly exploration feature, because they randomly explore different pricing and bidding strategy. They will realize that coordinate on that higher prices, lower bid is beneficial for the sellers. And also because their complexity, they are updating the speed, they realize that it can detect the deviation in this market. They will still coordinate on the steady state, but that state is beneficial for the consumers. And also for the empirical evidence, I present a negative interaction effect. So among the markets with high versus low consumer search, in the market with higher consumer search, in the market where ads are very important, actually higher algorithm usage lower the price in the market, and that benefits consumers. And finally, it can also benefit the platforms, and because compared with other outside platforms, the price on this platform becoming lower, the demand increase, their Amazon itself becoming more attractive, so that it can benefit the platform. If it doesn't, the platform can adjust the commission rate as an instrument, while adjusting the reserve price in market is not very effective. So this can be a win-win scenario, but it is based on high consumer search cost and very high commission rate. And this is what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, so if you can what would be your thought process or some cases when the consideration set is significantly bigger, that it's not small, but how the response change? So it seems like your results hold only when consideration set. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just asking, so it seems like your results hold when consideration set is small. What happens if consideration set becomes bigger?
If it becomes bigger, it is the previous result what we find in the literature. Basically, if your consideration set is very large and they still coordinate on higher prices, so this is still significantly concern. So that's why, for example, estimating the consumer search cost is very important for the policymaker, because they know which market they should look at first, which market they should regulate more.
What happens with the auction bids? So is there will also go on?
Yes.
So concern about your, I guess, definition of the high usage market. So if the markets with, I guess, seasonality or I guess more common demand shocks, so the prices move together more often, do you conclude that there will be mechanical conclusion that there is a high usage in these markets?
I'm stacking different periods for each market average price. So for each keyword, they are suffering from the same seasonality, but I don't pass all their seasonality. But you are right. For example, when I stack the price factor, I can pass out the seasonality that suffers from, for example, this movement more to look at the normal season.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to read this paper. Really like the paper because it combines three trades in that thing. Theory, simulations, and empirical analysis. So I was able to learn a little bit of everything by reading this paper. Even though it took me 60 pages of reading, but I managed to do it. Let me start with listing the main results. Depending on how you count, these are the main results. So in a theoretical model with two symmetric sellers, the authors show that collusion on product prices and ad bids can lead to win-win-win outcomes when most consumers have high search costs. Most consumers have high search costs can translate into small consideration size. So win-win-win outcomes means higher seller profit, higher platform profit, and higher consumer surplus. Okay. And what is interesting about this result is that it stands in contrast to existing literature, which generally shows lower consumer surplus when sellers collude on prices alone. Okay. And notice that this part of the analysis doesn't depend anything on Q-learning or algorithmic collusion or anything. This is just standard garden variety collusion. Okay. This could be the manager sitting together in a hotel room and discussing what they should do. Okay. And then the second part is where the algorithmic collusion kicks in. And in a simulation, the authors show that a Q-learning algorithm setting prices and ad bids based on reinforcement learning converges to prices that bear the same relationship to search costs as the theoretical analysis in the first piece does. Okay. So in other words, when most consumers have high search costs, it can lead to win-win-win outcomes. And the third piece of the paper has to do with the empirical analysis, where they look at Amazon data and show that when they track usage of algorithmic pricing and put that into the analysis, it has a negative effect on product prices in product categories with less search, but not in categories with more search. Okay. So this is the interactive effect that Hangcheng was talking about. Okay, we don't know what exactly algorithms are doing. Some of the questions were based on that. We can only observe the effects. Okay. Nobody, as I know of, has actually had a conversation with an algorithm. Okay. But we don't know exactly what they're doing, but they're doing some things. But we can observe what they're doing. They'll observe the effects of what they're doing. And according to the simulation, the effects of what they're doing seems to resemble what the theoretical analysis shows collusion looks like. So therefore, we conclude the algorithms are collusion because they lead to outcomes which seem to resemble what a monopolist would do in this setting. But that still leaves us with the following question: how can collusion on prices and ad bids, algorithmic or otherwise, lead to win-win-win outcomes?
Okay, and that is what I'm going to be focusing my discussion on. So what should we expect when sellers collude on prices and ad bids? We start with that question. Okay. Like I said before, this question can be asked of human sellers or algorithmic sellers. Okay. So sellers should benefit. They won't be colluding otherwise. That's the first part. What about the platform? Since the sellers benefit from collusion, one should expect the platform to benefit because platform has market power and it has the tools to extract rents from the sellers, right? It has the ad price auction and it has commissions. So if the sellers are making more money, Amazon will find a way to extract some money from them. So we'll take that as a given. They're also better off. Okay, so that leaves the third part. What about consumers? Well, these are the people who usually suffer when it's good news for the firm, it's generally bad news for the consumers. Okay, so our starting presumption should be that we should expect them to suffer if collusion is happening, right? That is the whole rationale behind antitrust theory. That's why we don't encourage monopolies. This is why we don't encourage collusion, right? So in this model as well, when the sellers only collude on prices, consumers are worse off, as shown in this picture. Okay, because a monopolist in this model wouldn't advertise at all, and when duopolists also don't, because they're not doing any collusion on ads, then what happens is that consumers are never better off. This red line shows the monopoly prices under monopoly, and the dotted line here shows what the duopolist would do in a Nash equilibrium when they are not using advertising at all. Okay, so as you can see here, prices are always higher for the monopoly compared to the duopoly. So collusion does the usual thing it does, which is make consumers worse. So the real surprise here is that consumers seem to benefit when collusion when sellers compete on prices and bids. So why does that happen when collusion extends from prices alone to prices and ad bids? Okay. So deciphering why that happens takes looking into the three fundamental moving parts here. One moving part here has to do with the fact that advertising and price do not actually interact on the demand side. So if you look at this profit function here, this is just a stylistic representation of what's going on. So you can see here, this is the margin here. As you can see, the marginal cost does depend on advertising. But on the other side, demand is a function of P only, and then A, which is the advertising, only functions as a scaling factor. Okay, so if you take the first order conditions here with respect to price and set them equal to 0, A will have no effect on price other than through the cost. That is important to keep in mind. So for example, an alternative might have been a profit function like this, where D is a function of A and P, and then P minus CA, but that is not what it is here. Okay. The second moving part is about the search costs. High search cost refers to when theta is equal to 1, which means that everybody in the market considers only the top listing. Their search costs are so high, they never go and look at the entire listing, they only look at the top listing. And then theta equal to 0 is the other opposite, which is these people look at everything. Okay. So this has an effect on whether advertising is done at all. It will be done when theta is equal to 0, but not when, or not. Okay, is that the opposite here? Is the opposite, right? Yeah, advertising is done when theta is equal to 1. It is not done when theta is equal to 0. Okay. Whether sellers compete on price, which happens when theta is equal to 0, because these people look at both the listings. Whereas if they don't look at both the listings, even the sellers who are competing are actually competing as a monopolist, because people are not looking at the second listing. And the third part is the monopolist himself, whether he operates as a single product seller, which happens under theta equal to 1, or as a multi-product seller, which is theta equal to 0. And in the latter case, what I will show is that, independence of irrelevant alternatives lifts the demand curve for the monopoly seller and makes it more price inelastic, which explains certain features of what we observe. So the third part is collusion versus competition. And for whatever collusion does, we can just look at the monopoly result, and that would be the collusion. Okay. So how the logic demand function works in different situations, I'll show three variants of this. So when theta is equal to 0, think of this as the monopolist is operating a red bus and a blue bus and getting sales from both in competition with a car. Okay. This is how the IIA works in this context. And then when theta is equal to 1, both the monopolist and the duopolist are operating a red bus or a blue bus, but both have only one product, so that the logit function looks like this. And then the third case is when theta is equal to 0, the duopolists compete with a red bus or a blue bus, so it looks like this. Okay. So you're asking, thinking about how this makes a difference. It turns out that the first demand function is larger than the second, which is larger than the third for same prices. Okay. Third thing is the price elasticity is going the opposite direction. So this is the most price inelastic. This is the second most, and this is the third most. Okay. So now with this, we can explain the results as to why it is that when collusion happens on ad bids also, it's possible for consumers to be better off. Okay. So let's recall that we already talked about this picture here, comparing the red line with the dotted line. So monopoly prices are never lower than national equilibrium prices when sellers don't use advertising. Okay. Now, furthermore, this line is decreasing with theta, and the duopoly dotted line is increasing with theta, even without advertising. So what's going on here is that this is where this logit thing that I showed you just now kicks in, because at this point, monopolist is behaving as if they have two products to sell, red bus and a blue bus. Whereas here, they only have red bus or a blue bus. I told you before that the demand is higher here than here. Okay. Also, demand is more price inelastic here than here. So that explains why the price is higher here than here. Okay. When demand functions become more price inelastic, prices go up for a monopolist. That's what happens. Now, the other part is here between this and this. Okay, here is just straightforward competition. These duopolists are competing with a product, and these guys are, this is the monopoly, obviously price, so this is higher than this. But here they coincide, because both of them, which is what is interesting about this, is that at theta equal to 1, when consumers are only looking at the top listing, even the duopolists are behaving like monopolists. Okay. Because they're basically facing this function here. Yeah. So as you can see here, the monopoly pricing coincides with the duopoly comparative pricing. Okay. So after all this, what remains to be seen is, what happens when the duopolists actually use advertising. So for all I've talked about is when duopolists are not using advertising. Suppose they use advertising. When they use advertising, the only other effect which happens is that their marginal cost goes up. I told you about one of the moving parts, that what advertising does here is it doesn't do anything on the demand side, it only does things on the cost side. So once you start advertising, basically your marginal costs go up. Okay. So as you can see, this dark line here just goes above the dotted line. The dotted line is when they don't use advertising. This is when they use advertising. So this goes up because marginal cost goes up. Okay, so when this goes up, then basically there's an intersection here. Okay, and that is where the Q-learning curve then shows us that it's possible that prices under Q-learning are actually lower than what the hash equilibrium prices might be. Okay. So because the Q-learning basically is somewhere in between the Nash equilibrium and the monopoly prices. Okay. So this is the summary of this. At theta equal to 0, the duopolies wouldn't advertise even if they were allowed to do so, because advertising will have no effect on demand while adding to costs. However, at theta equal to 1, they compete for attention via advertising, and in the process, the marginal costs go up. Nothing happens to the prices, and prices go up only because of what's happening on the cost side. Okay. Okay, so that's the summary of the results. Okay. Like I said before, the paper is pretty exhaustive about covering a lot of ground. There are still a few things which could be done. Okay. One is ask yourself, what would happen to collusion on ad bids if consumers were to actually benefit from advertising. In this model right now, advertising does nothing for the consumer. It's just a attention seeking game, right? Yeah, advertising just boosts the seller. That's all it does. Yeah. So it would be nice to see what happens to collusion on ad bids if consumers were actually to benefit from advertising. Okay. And just, even though the paper does look at some asymmetric sellers, most of the paper is focused on symmetric sellers. So some of the things which happen in the real world with human collusion can also happen with algorithmic collusion, namely that collusion may be harder to achieve when sellers are asymmetric, because the seller who has an advantage may have no interest in colluding with the guy who is at a disadvantage. Okay. The advantage seller may choose to target the low search cost segment and leave advertising out of the picture, while disadvantaged seller must rely on advertising because they will be disadvantaged in the organic results. Okay, so the asymmetry between sellers can play a big role here, because in the organic results, the advantage seller will have an advantage. In order to overcome that disadvantage, the disadvantaged seller will have to advertise. So the guy who does advertising will be probably the disadvantaged seller and not the advantage seller. And some of the empirical results are actually consistent with that. Okay. And then finally, the platform may privilege advantage sellers in the auction using relevance scores. Okay, which right now the model doesn't take that into account. Okay. Finally, the paper assumes that only ad position mediates search behavior, but in practice, many factors might affect search behavior, right? For example, when I searched for hiking shoes for men, I saw this results. And you can see here that, these are the ads. This is the only organic result in the first row, but it appears on the first row itself, as you can see. Okay. So, like Joan was mentioning yesterday, I think there are some people who just ignore all the sponsored ads and go straight to the organic. So, which is what I would have done here in this context. But notice also the fact that, all these brands which are advertising are not the well-known brands, whereas this one is. Okay. And furthermore, Amazon has embellished this with an overall pick. Okay. So it's kind of debatable as to what order people will search here, right? Because there isn't that much of a search cost involved in going from here to here. Okay. And this one actually has other things which are going on for it. Okay. So it's an interesting question to ask whether, to what extent position is the important factor in terms of attention capture. Okay. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
the intuition. Just a quick response so that we can go to lunch. So first, I agree that it might be very interesting to look at, for example, what if the advertising just increasing consumer welfare? What if consumers don't skip the sponsored result and that actually make the consumer like the product more? In that case, it might be not be including a lower price. And for the interaction between advertising and position, yes. So if we, for example, project the position effects on the perceived utility, if the combination of decreased perceived utility and increased awareness, the increased awareness still dominant, and I think this result will hold. But I agree that it might be very interesting to look at what if consumer just like sponsored ads a lot, and it might not lead them to include on lower base. I think that is very interesting. I'll look at it. Thank you.
Okay, we've got 90 minutes until 1 o'clock for lunch downstairs. This room will not be monitored. I recommend against leaving anything valuable.